What's going on, y'all? KM Best here. Mr. Negative has roared back into the metagame in a very real way. And I have as my guest today one of the people who is responsible for doing that, someone who piloted Mr. Negative all the way up to rank 2 in the world, and we'll see if he manages to hit rank 1 with it. YoWoody. I am joined by YoWoody, who has been one of the people pushing Jane Negative back into the metagame right now. My read on it is it's sort of the mid-range deck of combo decks. It feels like you're playing a normal game of Marvel Snap, but your high roll is so intense that you get to just sort of free roll some of the other combo decks. You beat up Hela, you beat up Phoenix Force because you are going just a little bit taller, or maybe a lot taller, depending on how many Iron Men you end up with. You get to actually do that, but you also get to be a ShangChi deck. That's my impression of the deck, but I'd like to hear from you, YoWoody, what it is that makes this deck relevant in the current metagame.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's like pretty much spot on. There are a few things that really have like converged to make negative in such a good spot right now. There's like the main reason I started playing it is there's just the insane prominence of other combo strategies like Phoenix Force and Hell are the most popular too. And I just wanted a deck that I could like a deck where I could take the people who were not playing those decks by surprise and get some good cubes out of them, but also a deck where I can just get like a free roll snap into other combo decks and negative is pretty much like the natural predator of those lower to the ground combo decks. Like the biggest fish of combo is like Tribunal, Iron Man, Onslaught, Mystique, that kind of stuff, but the Hela and Phoenix Force and like Shuri Kitty and some of these like combo leaning decks that are kind of more like small ball. Mr. Negative can just walk all over them. You really can just like free roll snaps. Like every time you have like turn 3 negative into any of these decks, it's just like such an easy snap, and most of the time you're just gonna come out on top.
Yeah, the thing that really strikes me about this deck is it's not just necessarily like turn 3 negative, but like if you're playing against Hela and you have Wong Panther Zola, then you can't lose. Like you actually just cannot lose. They are never
Yeah,
getting that amount of points. They're just not going to be able to do it. At the worst case scenario, you're ending up with 34 points in multiple lanes. The best case scenario, you literally cannot lose. And like
yeah,
that is like the big thing that really strikes me as like this is a deck that is built to absolutely farm decks that are not playing the interaction. And it does have some interaction vulnerability, right? Like if more people were playing Mobius, this would be in a bad spot. If more people were playing Enchantress, this would be in a bad spot. But I think what really sticks out is the aggression with which you can snap. So let's start with a basic one about snaps. Are there any matchups where you're not snapping a turn 3 Mr. Negative? Or you just like, is there anything you can see before turn 3 that'll make you be like, I don't want to snap this turn 3 Mr. Negative?
yes. The thing that I can see before turn 3 that would make me more hesitant about snapping is if my opponent plays the card Nebula, because this deck does struggle if you like are hard set on. Let's say you play like ramp into negative and then you draw like Wong Panther. You're like, okay, I have good cards in my hand, but they're not free. I need to be able to do a lot of stuff next turn. So you're like hard set on no matter what. You need to play Jane Foster. Games like that, you are very vulnerable to a lot of the strategies that a Nebula deck is employing, such as Eliath, because a lot of the time your only cards on the board are like your ramp card, negative, Jane. So sometimes they get, or most of the time they'll have priority and be able to like, if there's an empty lane, a smart player will be like, they're saving that lane for Arnim Zola, so let me just Eliath that lane. Nebula decks are playing Professor X, they're playing Eliath, they're playing Clog, which is really hard for this deck to deal with. Like, negative, when you're pulling all these zero cost cards to your hand, you're kind of stacking everything meticulously, preparing for like the final turn of the game, depending on what you have in your hand and what you think your strategy is going to be on that final turn. And Clog can really fuck with that. Like a super accelerated Clog game plan uh, can can hurt this deck really badly. And I would say that that is like the mid range deck that is it's like favored in a negative. Like Clog is like a hard favorite to win the negative matchup, I'd say. So I am very hesitant when snapping against somebody who plays like Nebula turn one, Jeff turn two. Like if they have like a good curve or like Nebula turn one, Ravona turn two, anything that can like lock me out of board space early would make me more hesitant in snapping. Same thing with like locations, like Central Park showing up and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is a deck that needs the board space that it has, because not only are you a Wong Panther Zola deck, which if you have other stuff there, it's really bad. You're an Iron Man deck, and as an Iron
Yeah.
Man deck, you need to have things around the Iron Man for him to be like he's a force multiplier. The smaller your units around the Iron Man are, God forbid they're negative, the worse he ends up getting. And so you end up in a situation where, yeah, I can see that. And as someone who's played a lot of Clog, right, like it does seem like the main upside of Clog is it's got good matchups into the combo decks. Like that's why it exists. And so
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if it had a bad matchup into this. But yeah, I get it. It makes sense to me. It does feel like this deck can very often push things to like 50-50s against Clog when it gets its good draws. Like if you're doing Jane negative stuff, like you're not going to be unfavored necessarily. It's just like you need to be doing that. And they don't necessarily need to be doing everything to make the matchup awkward for you.
Yeah.
And as far as like other matchups, I will say like I think this deck has a great degree of unpredictability. I'm thinking of like one game we had in particular that I ended up losing because I was like, okay, he's either gonna Shang Arnim Zola in one location, and if he does that, I can
Yeah.
win with the Professor X, or he's gonna Arnim Zola the Jane in a different location, and if he does that, I
I remember
lose.
that.
And it was
Yeah.
just like a pure guess on that, where it's just like I don't exactly know because of like just how strong the range on this deck is and just how odd things can get. You end up in scenarios where it's like, you have a Null, a Mystique, an Arnim Zola, a Shang-Chi, all being played out on the final 2 turns of the game. But it doesn't have to be like that. That could have been, an Iron Man on that Mystique. That could have been a Zola on the Null. It could have been a Zola on the Jane Foster. It could have been a bunch of different things. And those permutations are what I think gives the deck a lot of its strength. Talk to me about the range at the top end and what it is that kind of level of surprise can do.
Yeah, that is definitely an advantage that this deck has over like Phoenix Force and Hela. Is like Hela's like discard cards, revive cards. Phoenix Force is like blow thing up, bring thing back, or Shuri, Nimrod, boom boom. Like that those are the lines that you know are coming, and like if they ever want to do something kind of cute, even then you're like if you force them into a position where they have to try to get Q and like get a scammy win, even then, like their range is so easy to calculate and like you know exactly what they have. But with negative, it's like you never know what they're gonna do. I can set up a Wong and then I can just abandon that lane and put an Iron Man in another lane, Zola Iron Man to the Wong lane, like beta Cosmo out like that, or I can put a Null somewhere, Zola the Null, Shang-Chi, you're a big guy, I have a million power everywhere, and then I stack like 8 or 9 power mid with like a flipped Ironheart, Zola or something. And even like the non-negative games, you do have like some really good scam potential because of Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi just like you put him in every deck, you're gonna scam wins with him. It's the same in this deck. Like you have like this kind of more mid-range game plan you can take of like Ravona discounting cards, and then if your opponent plays something big, you like cheat out a Null on 5 with Ravona, and then you can go Mystique Shang on the final turn. And a lot of people just don't see that coming. Like they're like, oh, he's nulling, he's limping, he can't Zola that, nothing's died yet. So it just has like it has so many different intricate like little lines you can take and so many ways of playing around your opponent's tech cards. Like really the only tech card that just straight up kills this deck is like Mobius because it's proactive. But if your opponent is trying to react to what you're doing, you can juke them out in so many ways.
Yeah, Mobius is sort of the big worry here. This deck is sort of getting covered in terms of where the meta is by the other combo decks because it's like, what are you're gonna actually play Mobius? You're gonna play Mobius, and then when
Yeah,
you queue up into Hela, you're gonna play your 3/3 and
yes,
you're gonna feel terrible. Like there is a little bit of that in this metagame where it's like all the combo decks are incentivized to get like bigger and bigger and bigger to win the combo mirrors, and all the mid-range decks are just like kind of hoping that eventually it circles around to like we can just put one card in the deck and beat this stuff. And to be clear,
yeah,
that is something that could work. Like if this becomes like, if this pushes Hela out of the metagame, this pushes Phoenix Force out of the metagame, suddenly all those mid-range decks are going to be like, I'm just going to play Mobius.
yep,
And then this
yeah,
goes away entirely. The other
yeah,
decks come back. And then when the other decks come back, this deck has its like ability to predate upon them restored. It is a very contextual existence for this deck. And I think
yeah,
that is like this is what I try to hit on this channel, where it's like, literally right now, today, the context is good. A week from now, I cannot
Yeah.
promise that to be true.
Yeah.
So, what is it that you expect to see as the metagame evolves, and how would you expect to have this deck keep up with that?
I mean, honestly, the way the metagame is going right now, I think that like the fact that Mr. Negative is seeing play and the fact that it is kind of like it's preying on those other good combo decks, the Phoenix Force and Hella decks, it has actually pushed the meta in kind of like a more bearable spot for me, because like the fact that those decks have to be kept in check, and the way you keep this deck in check is by playing the card Mobius, and you play Mobius in mid-range, so people are going to be playing mid-range to counter this, and like this deck being in the meta right now, I think is actually a very, very good thing for the meta. When I first started playing it and doing really well with it, I thought it might have been like a bad thing that it felt so good right now, but as more people started playing it and the players needed to react to the fact that it existed, it is it's actually a really good, healthy deck to be very strong right now. And I think that if they do end up nerfing Hella to the point where like people, it's not worth playing anymore, it's too easy to counter, whatever, then that is when this deck gets in danger, because people don't have to worry about like, oh, you're playing a 3/3, I'm playing Hella, I do not give a shit. Like they just put the Mobius in the deck and this deck is dead. So as long as there are other combo decks like Hella and Phoenix Force that don't care about Mobius in the meta, then Negative is going to be able to just free roll those decks and beat mid range because it's not playing Mobius. So if that ever changes, that's when this deck gets into trouble.
Yeah. So snap wise, if you're seeing, I'm gonna name some cards. You tell me. We're gonna imagine you have, Psylock, Mr. Negative, right? It's not Ravona, Mr. Negative. It's not like the Uber Nut. We're gonna say you have Psylock, Mr. Negative. It's turn 2. Your opponent plays an Angela. Are you snapping?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
It's turn 2. Your opponent plays a multiple man.
Yes.
Okay. It's
100%.
turn 2. Your opponent plays a Ravona Renslayer.
No.
See, that one I think is
not
tougher,
snap.
because like it could be Negative, it could be the Clog thing, it could also be Tribunal,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So it's like that's a
Yes.
little bit more awkward. Are there, like we talked about, are there anything that you would not snap there? We talked about the Nebula stuff. So it kind of is just that. It is just like, if they're an Angela deck, we're snapping. If they're a combo deck we beat, we're snapping. And in the world where we don't have Mr. Negative, we're just like kind of limping in, and we're just going to have to like accept that we're going to lose those when they snap us, right?
Yes. Like if there's something like if there's something like location based that's like really gonna help you out when you don't have Negative, then you can stay in the game. If there's like an Onslaught Citadel, there's like a Monster Island, you have like Ravona, Shang, Null, Mystique in hand or something. But for the most part with this deck, you just need to be very like level-headed and try not to cope as much as you can.
Yeah.
Like if you have Wong Panther in hand and a Hella deck snaps you, you just gotta leave. Like if you do not have if you do not have Ravona Negative or Wong Panther Zola in the matchups you need them, then you just have to leave. You just have to keep like you can't cope with this deck. That's how you gain cubes.
That's going to be tough for not only me, but a lot of my audience. So, card by card breakdown. Psylock is the card that I think strikes me as like not the weakest card in the deck, but the card that is really just here because it's like, we want to turn 3 Mr. Negative. Is she ever doing anything other than that? Or is it like turn 3 Mr. Negative and then very rarely turn 5 Null?
She actually has a pretty decent role in this deck where obviously if you have Ravona Negative Psylock in hand on turn 2, you want to go Ravona into Negative. And one of the great things about having Psylock in your hand to do that is that if you draw a 6-cost Jane, you can Ravona Negative Psylock on 4 and still be able to get this 6-cost Jane out and draw all your zeros by turn 6, which is very helpful. And then Ravona discounting Psylock is also nice. Like a lot of the times you have like some of your zeros already in your hand. Like if you have like a Mystique and an Ironheart in your hand, you can do like Wong Psylock on 5, and the 2 extra energy on 6 could actually be helpful if you want to do like some stuff with the non-flipped cards in your hand because you already drew a couple of your good zeros. So she actually is she's pretty versatile in the deck, but she definitely, like, the sleeper thing that she does is allowing you to get the 6-cost Jane down on 5.
Is Ravonna Renslayer the best card in this deck?
Yes, by far she is. She allows the deck to exist, and she allows you to, like, she is the literal only reason that this deck ever stands a snowball's chance in hell at winning games when it does not draw Mr. Negative. Because you have just some, like, it's just, like, really, like, a little less than mid-range stuff that you can do. Where you have, like, Wong, Ironheart, Iron Man, Mystique, ShangChi. So she is the only reason that you can, like, scam wins where you don't draw, like, either Wong Panther Zola against combo or Mr. Negative against mid-range. So she's definitely the most important card in the deck.
Yeah, she has an unbelievable role where it's like she's the best card to go with your Mr. Negative plan, and then she's also the best card to when you don't have that. It's just like,
Yeah.
this is like, we lost Zabu, and that did hurt this deck to some degree because having extra versions of that is super sick. But losing Zabu in Mr. Negative specifically, way less impactful than losing this card.
Yes.
This card is like 2 Zabus. She's that good here. Related, Ironheart, is this the worst card in the deck? It strikes me as a card that exists because it bridges your synergies. Like, it works with Wong, it works with Mr. Negative, it works with Jane, it's fine enough, but it is like card number 12 is what it feels like to me.
Yes, Ironheart, 100%. That is very spot on. She's definitely the 12th card in the deck. I thought about replacing her a few times, but honestly, Ironheart is kind of like the best feeling 12th card in a deck out of any deck I've played. Because, like, there are games where, like, Ironheart is just your game plan. Like, like, you have, like, Ravonna, you don't draw a negative. Then you, like, Kamartage pops up, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna do Wong, Mystique, Ironheart, Zola, and that's like 1,000,000 points. It's like an insane backup game plan where it's just like Ironheart game plan. And she, like you said, like, she bridges your synergies between, like, Jane can fish her out of the deck, and she works with Wong, and otherwise Black Panther would be really the only card that you care about Wonging. She's decent for, like, Professor X stuff. Like, if you do, like, some preemptive mental math, you can stay in on a lot of snaps where you think they're about to prof you because your Ironheart will, like, tie or win that lane, and you win the breaker, or you just steal that lane. So she is still, like, a really good card in the deck, and she can win you some games, but she's not winning you games all the time. And if you wanted to flex a card in this deck, like Magic or Super Scroll or something wackier than that, then I would definitely start with Ironheart. So I'd say, it probably goes Iron Man 1, Null 2, Wong 3, Ravonna 4. So top priority, Iron Man, like, she's a 0/6 if she's flipped, and if not, then, like, when you have the Ravonna on the board, she's a 2-cost Iron Man if you're copying your flipped Iron Man, which is still just insane. Like, flipped Iron Man plus 2-cost Mystique and, like, your Jane lane and then, like, a Shang somewhere. Like, a lot of the times, if you're only drawing your flipped Iron Man with Jane, it's all good if you have Mystique in your hand. Like, she just multiplies the force of that line so much. And then with with Null, she's like, Null Mystique is like the way that you just literally delete Phoenix Force and destroy. Like, they can never in a million years beat Null Mystique. That's just super important for, like, you Shang one thing, they lose that lane because that guy's dead, and then his power goes to your Null and your Mystique. You win the other 3 lanes. Like, it's just an insane play for all 3. And also, like I said, a good backup line when you don't hit the negative stuff. You can cheese some games with that. Wong, Mystique is obviously very strong when copying Wong, but that line gets weaker because it's much slower than the other ones, much more telegraphed, and if you commit to it and they snap, you pretty much just have to run away because, like, you're just dead no matter what. There's no, like, juking it after you've committed to the Mystiquing the Wong. And then Ravonna is not as bad as you might think. but obviously it's pretty bad. Like if you're Mystiquing Ravonna, you're in like full on limp mode, and also you lose Mystique for any of your other ongoing targets that Ravonna is discounting. So you can win some games with that. Like you can actually go like Ravonna Mystique and then do like Ironheart Zola on 5, or like Wong Ironheart into Zola or something like that. So she still can do some stuff for you when copying Ravonna, but it's definitely, you know, you're on retreat watch.
I don't actually have a good question for Mr. Negative, so what I'm going to ask is compare the impact of a turn 3 Mr. Negative to the impact of literally any other card in the game. Do you think this is the most impactful thing to do? Like, let's say your combo, such as it is, we have, Psylock, Mr. Negative, Jane, right? That's your combo. More impactful or less impactful than, say, Phoenix Force? And I think the answer is probably going to be more impactful. How would you compare then the backup plans of those respective decks? Given that we accept our combo nut draw is stronger than Phoenix Force's combo nut draw, is their Shuri Nimrod stuff better than our ability to limp? Do they limp better than us? How does that approach?
So I would say that yes, Mr. Negative is like probably one of the most impactful plays, like top 5 most impactful plays you can make on turn 3 in the entire game. That's like something that's not interacting with your opponent, like something that you're just doing. In terms of like this deck's ability to limp compared to, let's say, like Phoenix Force, they have Shuri Nimrod, and then Hela, they just have like Corvus play big cards. Um, I would say that it is probably slightly worse most of the time, but the deck does have different degrees of limping, where it's like you do not draw Mr. Negative, you're just like waiting for a snap so you can retreat, or you're like confident that you have something that can just scam out the lane, or you have location, or scam out the game, or you have location help or something in a lane. But if you're doing like Tempo Ironheart into negative on 4, Jane on 5, that is also like a kind of limping line in this deck, where like people will want to snap you after they see the Ironheart, but you can still get away with winning those games sometimes. Like if you have like flipped Mystique, flipped Null in your deck, and you have like a 6-cost Zola in your hand, you can still like barely go over the top of whatever your opponent's been doing that game with just negative on 4, Jane on 5. So it's kind of the way where it's like if a Phoenix Force deck plays Shuri Nimrod, sometimes they have, Ghost Spider, Carnage, Venom. Sometimes they just have like Deathlock, Carnage. So it's like different degrees of limping. And I would say that this deck's ability to limp when not in the combo matchup is slightly better than like Hela and Phoenix Force, because you can still do like all the unexpected shit.
I feel like the Wong part of this deck is like there would be very bad cards in here if they weren't, Wong Panther doing things in there. And if Wong Panther wasn't as good as it is right now in some matchups, this deck would be markedly worse. So tell me what Wong is adding here.
Yeah, so I think it was the first video you did in this series, Big Baby covered a negative deck, and that was playing Darkhawk.
Yeah,
Darkhawk obviously doesn't really, not worth it in negative anymore.
used to be a 4-0
And
RIP.
yeah. And so even if he was a 4-0 still, it's like too small ball for the purpose of this deck in the meta right now, where Wong is pretty much just like the card that is your combo killing backup plan. So like Wong can be a backup plan against some other like weird stuff like Cerebro 2 or discard or something that's not like necessary combo. It's just uninteractive. But the real purpose of him is that you need something where even if you're not doing Ravonna into negative, because that's like way less consistent than Hela discarding cards and bringing them back, you can still just kill that deck. And Wong Panther Zola is your way of doing that.
ShangChi is probably the thing that is most off the wall about this deck. Talk to me about why ShangChi is in here beyond the obvious, and I guess as a sort of secondary follow up question, how many times have you ShangChi'd every lane?
I've ShangChi'd every lane, definitely in the double digits by now. I hate Shang, but when I'm playing him in this deck, he's actually super fun. Like, just blowing everything in every lane up and watching your nulls just grow as they die and the Hella player cries is super fun. That's like his main purpose is to be, like, Ravonna is the most important card in the deck because she is your main plan and your backup plan, and then like your tertiary plan, which is just because he's so widely useful, is Shang-Chi something. Like if you Shang-Chi something, you can just win the game sometimes. Like you just do Wong, Ironheart, Shang something. He's super good for scamming and limping, and if your opponent's playing like really greedy big stuff, you can Zola the Shang, and sometimes that's more value than Zolaing like anything else in your hand. If you miss like Wong, it can most of the time just be better than Zolaing Panther. He he's like a null enabler because obviously it's not a destroy deck. You need something to kill if you want your nulls to be big a lot of the time, and most of the time that's either you're Zolaing Panther, you're Zolaing Null, or you're killing something with Shang. So Shang is like probably the second best card in the deck. I know it's kind of hard to believe Shang could be the second best card in the deck, but yeah, he's just insanely good in this deck for so many reasons because he's Shang-Chi.
Iron Man is a card that's difficult to talk about in Mr. Negative decks because it feels like everyone already knows what this card is here to do. Iron Man is here to cheat as much as you possibly can, hopefully be free, and just be like effectively a 10 power Iron Man. Like that's really all you're trying to do with this is just slap him in whatever lane, win a bunch of games. When your opponents know an Iron Man is coming, how often are they like coping into it? They're just like, I'll be fine. How often does that happen? Or is it just like you're going to have to accept that you need to snap early in order to win a couple cubes rather than like winning big 8 cubers? Because I think at this point, everyone's like, oh, it's an Iron Man is about to show up and like ruin my entire life.
I mean, honestly, if you asked me before I started playing negative this season, I'd be like, oh yeah, bro, they respect the shit out of that. They're always gonna leave. You gotta snap every time. But no, no. So many people just do not care. Like they will snap you back. And I'm like, what are you doing? Do you not know that there is a 0/5 Iron Man in my hand? I'll play Jane on 5, draw 3 cards against a Hella deck or a Destroy deck, and they snap me back. It's like they forget what I'm inverting because every single time my opponent is playing negative, if they play Mr. Negative on the board, the only thing I am thinking of for that entire game is like, do I have a snowball's chance in hell of beating a 0/5 Iron Man this game? So there's not much respect for this card, honestly. I think people just don't realize how obscenely tall this card lets you go. And if you are playing like against a matchup, like I said, where I'd be like wary of snapping early on an early Mr. Negative, Iron Man is like the draw where you can probably just snap at that point.
Like where you get the inverted one, to be clear.
Yeah, yeah.
We talked about Panther Zola specifically, like Wong Panther Zola. How often are you just mixing in Black Panther as just like a big guy? That's a big guy, and all my other cards cost 0, so he's going to be an 8, right? How often is that just like your final turn play?
I mean, Panther is honestly really good for that reason because like there's a lot of times where you're playing Mr. Negative deck and you don't have Jane in hand, so you need to play on turn 5. Sometimes that play is like non-inverted Iron Man teeing up like a Mystique plus everything bullshit, and then some of that time it's just like a Panther, and you don't have to commit to that Panther at all. Like if you just turn 5 Panther, you can still like choose to Zola something else, like an inverted Iron Man or a Null or a Shang-Chi or whatever, and your opponent is like focusing on the Black Panther way more than you were because you're just chilling. Like if you're you ramped in a negative and then you turn 5 Panther, you're in a good spot. You have like good cards in your hand. So a lot of the time it can just be kind of like a bait play. And then when you do draw the negative Panther, it can actually be really important for winning certain matchups that like to restrict your board space, like Lockdown and Clog, because it's really important to be able to like play a singular big card that is not Iron Man. Because like if you have a Hobgoblin in an Iron Man lane, sometimes Hobgoblin just like he just locks that lane off of Iron Man, even though you're not actually out of board space there. So Panther is really important at being like one guy that can get big, or like if you do like Wong Panther, you can get over the top of a lane and then focus like your other stuff that's been kind of like nullified its effectiveness in that lane in the other lanes.
Jane Foster, obviously an insane card in a deck where you are drawing Iron Men off of her that are better than normal Iron Men. How much does her power go down by having each of the cards that you would otherwise want to invert in your hand already? Like, one of the things that will happen when you play this deck is you'll do the Mr. Negative thing, but then you'll be like, oh man, I have like Iron Man Null just sitting here in my hand. If you could rank the targets in terms of like how bad it is to not hit them off of Jane in a Jane game, what would you rank it as?
It's definitely like Iron Man, and then Iron Man's the worst one to miss, and then Mystique second worst because whatever the other two good ones you get are being Iron Man or Null, you want Mystique to go along with them, or she can copy a Wong or something. And then after Mystique is Null because Null is kind of like uh he's not as like free roll as Iron Man. Sometimes it's a little weird to get him to line up and actually like be a big thing. And then Ironheart is just like she's there because she works with Wong and stuff. She's never gonna be like the card that you are like praying for off of your Jane. So you don't mind missing her too much if you're drawing the other stuff. But like Jane's strength in this deck and the ability to snap like Ravona, Mr. Negative, Jane is like very contingent on what cards you currently have in your hand. Because like if you have like Null, Mystique, Iron Man in your hand, by the time you get to the Jane, then she's not doing that much for you. But at the same time, you might be drawing like an Ironheart and something else, with the Jane. So you still kind of have to snap it because your opponent will see you drawing cards with Jane. They won't know what you're drawing. If you want like any sort of respect from your opponent and like any chance that they just do leave the game if you're not drawing like the exact perfect stuff, you need to raise the stakes before you play Jane.
How much is Zola adding to this deck, like as a card? How much is he being played when he's not inverted? And how much better does he get when he is inverted?
I mean, flipped Zola is pretty broken. I kind of forgot to talk about flipped Zola when I was talking about the flipped cards, but he is like, he's like the I don't know. He might be my favorite flip card in the entire deck because like he just lets you do whatever you're doing too. You can Shang every lane. You can put an Iron Man in the side lanes, and he's still 6 power mid. You can like play Wong into Ironheart or Wong like Mystique, Ironheart, Zola all in one lane. Like he's like just the finisher to almost every like insane Giganut high roll you have. Like he's insanely fun in the deck. And a lot of the time, he can be the only reason that you are able to go over the top of some of the more insanely greedy decks. Because, like, sometimes you'll have, like, a flipped Iron Man and then an unflipped Mystique. But it doesn't matter, because you don't even need Mystique, because you have flipped Iron Man, flipped Zola, or unflipped Zola even to Zola the flipped Iron Man. Like, he literally just is, like, the finisher to every, like, optimal line you want to take with this deck.
Is Null mostly just like, oh, it's a 0/6. Ah, I'm playing a 0/6. Or I guess we have the ShangChi stuff, but like most of the time, is he just like, this is a guy. Sometimes I get Null Zola and he is like, free 12s, right? And just goes everywhere. But it's mostly because he's free, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's mostly because he's free. It's nice to have Null in the deck because I'd say Null in this deck is like 50% your combo stuff with like Negative and Shang and Zola and all that. And then the other 50% is like literally a tech card. Like you just win against Destroy, you just win against Phoenix Force if you're playing Null. Even without drawing Mr. Negative. Like if you hit Ravona into Null on 5, Mystique, something on 6, like you can just win those games for free. So a lot of the time he does end up feeling like a tech card that you have to kind of like work to get to.
Yeah, his synergy with Ravonna specifically is something that's like, oh, that's like a really unique thing. Like being able to play Null Mystique against Destroy, being able to play Null Mystique against like the Shuri Nimrod decks. That kind of stuff is really relevant. And so I think
Yeah.
like he does have more utility in this metagame because it's like Mr. Negative decks have been running him for a while, but those have not been major metagame concerns and now they are, so he's a little bit better.
Yeah.
All right, I am like kind of shocked at like the length of this episode. Like we really kind of went in depth on this. I've been going longer and longer on these, and I kind of wonder if we're hitting like the point of diminishing returns. I don't think we are because I feel like I'm learning a bunch of stuff, and I hope the people who are watching are feeling like they're learning it too. So, any last tips for anyone who's like picking up this deck for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of double back on something I said before, just like fear the card Ravonna. Like, Ravonna means that whatever your opponent is doing is either as good as you or kills you because they're playing Professor X or they're playing the same deck as you or they're playing Tribunal. You have to fear Ravonna and you have to, like, if you're staying on some, like, super crazy read, but if, like, you just hit the read, you win. Like, if you're trying to do, like, a Shang scam, or you think your opponent is gonna like Shang your thing, so you like Null Mystique, and that's like your only real way of winning. With this deck, I just stay on those games. Like, if you want to be like able to climb, even if it's like a 4 cuber, I'll stay no matter what. Like, if you want to be able to climb with negative, you just need to be able to see like the the games that you were actually able to scam without Mr. Negative. So keep an eye out for those games as much as you can. And like I said, try not to like cope.
The line between cope and what you just described is very thin. Like
Yes, it is. That's like the real skill cap of like skill ceiling of the deck.
All right. So, YoWoody, thank you so much for doing this. You're the record holder now. You passed Big Baby. You're the most guest on this channel. I'm gonna give you a little medal. I might put it there in post production. I probably won't. Thank you so much for doing this. Where can the people find you?
I stream 6 days a week on YoWoody MJ at YoWoody MJ on Twitch. Sorry, and then I have a Twitter at YoWoody2 where I post decks that I'm trying into the meta, things that I have success with. So follow me on there too.
Are you gonna get on YouTube anytime soon?
Oh yes, I am actually starting a YouTube channel very soon. It's just YoWoody MJ. I'll be uploading just like deck guides and kind of like meta takes and stuff like that. And also, just shout out to Tanjo and Husky, my best buds in the scene. Those guys are always doing good stuff too. So
yeah, I will say of them, I've had Husky on here. He shouted you out. I had Tanjo on here. I think he shouted both of you out. The triumvirate. It's like you're doing a thing there. All right. Thank you so much, of course, to all of you, the viewers who made it through, enjoyed everything that you made. I'm losing my mind here. Thank you so much to all the viewers. I'm leaving that in who made it this far in the video. If you enjoyed that, please leave a like, a comment. I still read them all. And make sure you check out YoWoody on the platforms he previously discussed. Thanks so much.